Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. And as usual, I'm asking Katie what's happening in Iowa, but I also need to ask what happened on your business trip because you actually got to leave the farm. So, what's new in Iowa? Did everyone miss you? And how was big city life?
The girl child drew a picture of me in our family calendar so that she could cross off days. The only souvenir they asked for was for Minecraft fruit snacks from our local Walmart. So I don't think they quite grasp how souvenirs work yet.
I just want the stuff that I already know I like.
Yeah. I think Jim probably missed me more than anyone, except maybe the dog. The dog was pretty beside herself. The trip was really, really good. I don't think I'll fly Alaska Airlines again.
Did something in particular happen? Or did you end up in Alaska when you didn't want to be?
No, but close to it. They, less than an hour before the flight, moved the gate from the D concourse at SeaTac to the N concourse at SeaTac, which is literally the opposite end of the airport, which seems a little short-sighted, perhaps. And then as we were...
And maybe not their fault. That could be the airport.
Yeah, but still. They had already changed it once before that, too, so that was a little...
Right, yes. So then you got to go for a big walk.
As we're, taxiing, getting ready to taxi down the runway, they say, please unplug everything from USB power, which, okay, like maybe they're worried about a power surge or something. And then they say, and open all of the window shades for takeoff, which probably has some perfectly good reason, but feels a lot like, so you can warn us if one of the wings falls off.
We need to be able to check our blind spot through your tiny window.
Yeah.
So remind us where you were. Seattle, is that right?
I went to Bellevue, which is, as I was told by many folks in Seattle, the tech bro money part of Seattle, which is true. Apparently 10 years ago there was nothing there, and now it's just tech bros wall to wall, which is good because everything is nice and new and clean and shiny, and is bad because it's expensive and there's not really any people there. I mean, there's a lot of people there, but it's not like a normal town. But we had a really good couple days of meetings, and I got to do some sightseeing and went to a Korean spa with a coworker, which was amazing. Highly recommend.
So you're super relaxed now? Or all your pores are cleansed or something like that?
Well, I was for like a couple hours, yeah. I felt a little bad. The pedicurist obviously doesn't see a lot of people who wear boots for a substantial amount of time. Like work boots, not like fancy boots. Yeah, other than that, things are just ticking along. How are things in Canada, Arlene?
Well, since Katie was away and we had no interviews scheduled last week, I actually took it upon myself to schedule myself some lunch dates, which was kind of like interviews, but I just didn't record anything. So that was kind of fun. Because I find that I'm one of those people who, if there's one thing scheduled in the day, then I can't do anything else. So I did go out of my way to schedule some lunches with a few people in the middle of the day because we're kind of in that hold pattern where silage hasn't quite started yet and beans are close, but they haven't started yet. So it's just still nice out and harvest hasn't started. So that's some of what I did last week. I had sick kids a couple of days, so that meant that I was home with them. And I was not feeling the greatest, not terrible, but just kind of blah. So yeah, it was not the most exciting of weeks, but taking along. People are going to school most of the time, and the crops are so close. I think it's possible, actually. We're recording on Monday. The equipment from our custom combine operator showed up last night, so they may actually be combining out there somewhere right now. I'm not sure. I didn't see the combine arrive this morning, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So the beans are probably coming off.
When I left at the beginning of last week, nothing was really happening in the fields. I had to drive to Minneapolis, so I got a good view of what's happening in our region. Beans are coming out in a lot of places. When I got home, a little bit of early corn has started. A lot of corn is finishing getting chopped, and we're in that same holding pattern of people just sort of pacing up and down and greasing stuff and looking anxious and checking the weather.
Yeah, how about now? Let's test them again. One more time.
Yeah, yeah. Have they dried it all in the last 10 minutes? Let's check it. Maybe it's dried. Maybe it's dry now.
There was some dew this morning, but it's going to be sunny all day, and it's probably fine.
I did find out we took the kids to a local small town festival and found out that our kids indeed do remember going last year, but they thought it was for their friend's birthday because the friend lives in said small town. So they were pretty sure that the whole town puts on a 2-day festival just for their little friend's birthday, which was really nice.
Might as well. I think you need to share the name of this small town festival because it is just like a delight.
It is the Freilich Falderall. The Freilich tractor was the first gasoline tractor that could go forward and backward, which was,
So fancy.
for obvious reasons, so quite an innovation. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good feature. All tractors seem to have that now,
yeah,
so they went
yeah.
with it.
I feel like being able to reverse probably did really, um, I was going to say move things forward, but I guess it didn't.
Move things forward and back, and then forward again.
Uh, Drove progress. Let's put it that way.
There you go.
Um,
That sounds like a slogan right
yep,
there.
yep.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for this week?
All right.
Today, we are excited to be talking to Katie Kulla, who's joining us from Oregon. And Katie, with a K, we start each of our interviews with the same question. And this is our way for you to introduce yourself to our listeners. So we always ask the question, what are you growing? Which for our farmers is usually crops and livestock, but can also be kids and businesses and lots of other stuff. So, Katie, what are you growing?
Thanks, Arlene, and thanks, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. I love that question. We on our farm are growing vegetables this summer and fruits like always. So, in terms of what we have right now, this morning with my eggs, I ate some roasted cauliflower and zucchini and garlic. And last night I went on a bike ride with my family. And when we got back, we stood under the plum tree and gorged ourselves on yellow plums. But I'm also always doing the work of growing my kids. They are now 11 and 14. And I should also mention that I'm growing some new skills. I'm working on getting my teaching license here in Oregon. And so this summer I am taking 4 education classes, which it turns out is a lot of classes. So that's what I'm growing right now.
Yeah, probably 4 doesn't seem that much when you're signing up for them, but when it actually comes to completing the work, that that turns into a whole different thing.
I mean, I think that's the story of life. Everything seems easier from a distance.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So we talk to farmers who have lots of different sizes and scales of farms, and it's
Mhm.
hard to tell sometimes. People are sensitive to talking about numbers of acres and that kind of thing. In some places, but can you give us some context in terms of what kind of a size of property you're working with and where you're located?
Yeah, so we own 50 acres here in Oregon. We're in the Willamette Valley, so we're about an hour south of Portland, Oregon, which is what most people know in our state. And we rent a little over half of our acreage to a local dairy farmer, and we manage the rest. We have a few acres that are in a riparian zone area that we've expanded and planted a lot of trees. And then we have about 17 acres that we actively manage. But at this point, we mostly are growing vegetables for ourselves and about 2 smaller clients. And so for us, we are down to about an acre of vegetables, which for 15 years we ran a pretty big CSA. And at one point, we even were farming on 100 acres of mixed pasture, orchards, berries, vegetables, grains. So for us, this feels small, but for some people, it might seem big. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's right. An acre of vegetables for me would be a lot, but yeah, I get how at different times and depending what your needs are and what you're doing, that can change.
Hmm. Well, and we have all the tools from still from when we were managing 100 acres, so it helps.
Katie, I want to insert here. I actually found you through your illustrations on social media, and then found out that we have a "the world is a really small place" sort of connection, in that one of my high school friends from Iowa is your family dentist in Oregon, which is a strange and random thing.
Yes. So fun. Yes. He's our dentist, and also for probably 10 or more years was also a farm customer of ours, and our kids are the same age and our families are friends. It is a small world.
All right,
Yeah.
so how did you get started farming, and what was your background like?
Yeah, like a lot of people in farming today, my husband and I did not grow up in farming families at all. He grew up at the beach in sort of a tourist town here in Oregon, and I grew up in a suburb of Seattle. But we met young, got married young, and just always really loved the idea of growing things. Even when we were in college and we were newly married, I asked the landlord of the apartment building where we lived if I could plant daffodils in the garden beds. So I was like 19 and I was like, can I go with my own money, buy some daffodil bulbs and put them on your property? Just because I really wanted to plant something. But it didn't never occurred to me that farming could be an actual career path. That just was not something that was presented to me as a young person growing up in a suburb. But then I had the opportunity to run a kitchen at a remote mountain retreat center in central Washington state, where at the time we were procuring as many vegetables and fruit as we could from the region. It's a really amazing agricultural region, especially for things like stone fruit. I mean, the most amazing peaches you'll ever eat right there. And as part of my job, I got to go and visit these farms, meet these farmers. And it was where I really first saw the phenomenon of people choosing to start a farm, thinking of it as a small business, that they take control of the marketing and really use that direct market model to make a living. And it was very inspiring for me. So after we were at that retreat center, we got a job working for a local organic farm in Bellingham, Washington, worked with him for 2 years. He was an excellent farmer, excellent teacher. We learned a ton. And then in 2006, my husband and I decided that that's something we wanted to do in life. We had saved a little bit of money and I guess had the nerves to do it. I don't know, or the excitement or the naivete, all of the above. But it was a great moment to do it. This was 2006, so it was right at the beginning of a huge wave of interest in local food. I think in the next year is when Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, came out. So we looked all over Oregon. We wanted to be back near his family, and this is also just a great place to grow, and settled on the area around the little town of McMinnville, Oregon, which is in Oregon's wine country. And so there's a lot of interest in food that goes along with interest in wine. A lot of really good restaurants who wanted to buy from local farms, a lot of people who were living here because they loved wine and they also loved food. And at the time, there was nobody doing a CSA in the community of that scale. So we were able to move here, rent some land, and our first CSA pickup, we already had 40 members signed up, which was incredible. When people didn't know us from Adam, but we marketed ourselves. We put our marketing to good use in the community and networked, and it's an amazing community. We still live in this community, and it's a very special place, just really good people. And so we did that for 15 years. This was our full-time living. We had our CSA. It got a lot bigger and it's smaller again. We grew all the things for 2 years, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. We even offered what we called a full diet CSA, where we were not only doing fruit and vegetables, but we were doing meat, dairy, eggs, grains, berries, just trying to meet as much of people's dietary needs as we could. That ended up being very stressful, but it was also fun. So, and at that point, we were also renting another 50 acres. So we were managing 100 acres. So we've been kind of all over the place. But then mid 2020, I suppose because of the pandemic, I think it was a good opportunity for everybody to sort of check in on their life. Also, I was about to turn 40. So kind of midlife evaluation stuff. We decided to step back from the big commercial farming and it's not because it wasn't working, it was. But I think we realized at that point that life is a lot longer than we understood when we started our farm. We were only, I think I was 25 when we started the farm. So I was really young. And we just realized that we wanted to do more than just farming in our life. We just wanted a broader range of experiences. And for us, with the way that we farmed, especially because here in Oregon, you can really farm year round, we just like really hadn't had a significant break and didn't really have a lot of time for side interests. We'd never taken our kids on a significant summer vacation. And we also just had personal other career related interests we wanted to explore, like for me, writing, which we'll talk about with my book that's coming out. And there just wasn't space. So it was an incredibly hard decision. Farming was so much of our identity and our life. It was like who our friends were based on who our customers were. Um, I walk around our community and my kids laugh because literally everywhere I go, there's former customers. And they're young enough that they don't necessarily remember, and they weren't always there for CSA pickup. So for them, they've had a different experience with the farm. It's more just their home. So they're like, how do you know all these people? But um, yeah. So is the farming part of our life is still happening, and by many people's standards, it would be a lot what we are doing. But by our experience, it's like now more of our side interest slash home maintenance project than our full where we put our energy every day. It's not our growth area too. I mean, I think that's important, right? As humans, to always be growing, and so at this point, it's just not the area we're putting that kind of psychic energy because it's so familiar to us. You know, it's something that we just really know how to do. Whereas other people have a different first career, come to farming later, and it's the fun growth thing they do in the second half of their life. We're just in a different stage, but we still love it and we love living here.
That's a really good way of looking at it too, that where you're putting your energy. And like we said, our question always is, what are you growing? So yeah, where is that growth coming from right now, right? And where are you putting your energy? So on that note, you mentioned your book, and that's is a really neat connection between us. It feels like this is our we're all talking the same language here. So the title is Farm Raised Kids: Parenting Strategies for Balancing Farming Life with Running a Small Farm or Homestead. And I mean, that aligns so much with what we're doing here on our show, is talking to farm parents and finding out their tips and tricks, and how they're making it all work. So what was your inspiration behind this book?
Well, I imagine it was similar to your inspiration for starting the podcast. It felt like there was so much to say and not a huge amount of people talking about it. My oldest is 14, so I had him in 2009, and at the time, I don't know that I had really clear understanding of exactly what we were getting ourselves into. I had enough friends with smaller babies and children that I knew I probably wasn't going to just be strapping him to my back and farming as usual. And thankfully, I knew that. So we had built into our farm plans to like we hired our first employees. For example, the year I was pregnant, and before that was just my husband and me for 3 years doing literally everything on our farm: marketing, hoeing, harvesting, all of it, But we knew that there was no way we were going to be able to manage being parents and still doing everything. So but that was a big experience, even though I had some sense of what was going to happen, it was still like every day felt like a new puzzle to solve. And then the kids were changing all the time too. And then when we had our second child, it was even a whole different puzzle. So, we have this great community of farmers here in Oregon who we used to meet with every February at a hot springs retreat center. And we would have kind of a farm conference, but it was not as formal as farm conferences are with presentations. It was more an opportunity to connect around different topical subjects and share information farmer to farmer. It was called the Farmer to Farmer Connection. And uh, every couple of years, we would have a session about how do you manage your family with your business and your farm, both the farm work and the business part and your family. And we felt like it was this story that hadn't really been talked about because maybe there was this presumption that like the mom will just take care of it. But then when mom was also like in charge of marketing and payroll and maybe even managing a crew, that answer doesn't work as smoothly. So it's sort of a classic story of how do you balance being a working mom with being a mom, but with more complexity because also your kids are literally present at your workplace 24/7, depending on how you do it. So I just felt like there was a lot to talk about. And I also really wanted to bring a lot of voices into the conversation on this topic and highlight that there is no one right way to do this. So that was a really huge inspiration in how I decided to write the book. I reached out to over 20 different farm families. I actually reached out to more than that, but I selected the families I selected to feature in the book, intentionally trying to offer as much diversity of voices as possible. So people with different scales. So the smallest acreage is actually a double city lot. The largest is over 1,000 acre orchards, almond orchards in California. So, and then everything in between. Most of the people are on smaller acreage than that. And then same with family size. The smallest family is a single mom and her daughter. And then the biggest family is a family with 10 kids. But then there's also people who are living on properties with multiple families. So again, just I wanted to provide a place to get a lot of ideas out there so that somebody who maybe is having their first baby and has a homestead can get just a lot of wisdom and ideas on both, what to expect, what kind of likely challenges are you going to face, but also how other people have solved them.
So, Katie, I'm really impressed that you felt confident enough to put yourself out there as a resource, because I feel like there's very much this, especially around parenting, less so than other businesses. I think, like, I know plenty of people who will tell people how to run their business with absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Where for a lot of folks, I mean, I know plenty of people who are happy to offer parenting advice with no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Especially somebody with a 2-year-old and they're telling the person with the 10-year-old what to do.
I was a much, much better parent before I had kids than I am now. So much better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think, especially for farm families, so much of what we hear as a parenting podcast is that people just want to know that nobody else knows what the hell is going on either. And that if they do know what the hell is going on, they're happy to share that wisdom. And I think just that no matter how much of a shit show it is, we all still have wins and we all still have, little moments where things do go right. And it's really nice to be able to share that with other folks. And so I'm really glad to see people putting that forward, that you don't, I don't want to say you don't have to know what you're doing, but it's not like everybody else got a user's manual and you didn't. I think there can really be that feeling that everybody else knows what the hell is happening.
I do want to say though, Katie, I had a lot of goals with this book, and one of them was to get a lot of voices and diversity, not only to provide a lot of options of ideas, but also, part of my goal was to expand people's understanding of who even are farmers in our country and our world. Because I feel like for so long, farm literature has been very male and very white. And that doesn't reflect who actually farms in our country. So that was my other goal with this book. But another goal was to be a counterbalance to social media. There's so many farmers and homesteaders on social media presenting extremely beautiful, curated images of their farms and their families. And that has just not been my experience. And when my kids were young, that was when Instagram really first came on the scene, and I resisted getting a smartphone for a long, long time. So it wasn't really an option for me to be on there. But I had a farm blog, and I really tried to think through okay, what am I doing as I communicate about our farm, especially because we were a business. I wasn't trying to be an influencer, although that wasn't even a word back then. And I really personally intentionally decided that I didn't want to turn our family life into content for other people to consume. And that's not a judgment on other people for whom social media is a really important creative outlet or way that they've been able to like have a side hustle to make income from their money. I'm not judging other people. That was a personal decision. And part of it is because I did feel like our family's life was so messy and I didn't want to present it in a way that wasn't authentic or real. And so, and it's not like we didn't have so many cute moments. I mean, my kids were like so cute. I just look at those photos of them in those early years and I'm like, oh my gosh, they were so little, like they're little, like they were always naked and like their little feet were always dirty. Ah, it was so cute. But it was also a hard time, you know? It was like, I didn't always feel like I was doing it right. And so I very intentionally wanted this book to have voices from people that were not curated in a way so as like that we're trying to sell some kind of romantic lifestyle. And it's not that it's a depressing book. It's very uplifting. There's lots of good stuff in this experience. And I included that too. But like my parents were flipping through it and my mom commented just as a quick observation. She was like, I love that people's clothes are actually dirty. And I was like, yeah, right. And she was talking about the adults because um, you know, we had an excellent photographer, Sean Linehan, do some of the photography, and then in other cases, the farmers provided it because they had professional photographers take photos who were willing to share it, which was awesome. But we really wanted actual snapshots of actual farm life. So, you know, when the photographer went out, these farms were busy. Like the parents were very graciously fitting her into a day when they might also be harvesting and managing a crew or doing whatnot. And so like they were wearing their actual farm clothes. So I feel like even though the book has a very hopeful message about the experience, and it's certainly, I think, inspiring, it's also like, this isn't going to be clean. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be easy or tidy. You know, this is real. And there's some real quotes in here from people who have struggled at times in their path. And I just really appreciate the generosity of people sharing about that honestly and not in that faux authentic way that you get sometimes when where an influencer pairs a really beautiful photo of themselves with something like, I have struggles too. Sorry, I don't want to be too harsh on influencers. It's just like a whole different choice. I wanted something else, you know, that's an okay thing. And if that's inspiring and helps people, that's great. But for the people who feel overwhelmed by those stories and images and feel like they can't compare and their life doesn't meet those standards, I have a book for them. They can just put it on their nightstand and hang out with the people in my book.
I think, too, as someone who started their family at the same time that we started direct marketing, we weren't able to get pregnant, and so we contracted to buy a bunch of cows and then promptly got pregnant. The week before the first farmers market that we were attending to sell meat, and had the baby at the last farmers market. I mean, not she was not born at the market. She attended, thank you, Arlena, attended the last market. But I think for me, in so many good ways, our customers become part of the family. I mean, we had customers at our baby shower. We have customers who still babysit our kids. We've become good friends, but it can feel really invasive too, because you do end up with that like parasocial relationship that people feel like they know you because they see what you post on social media. And especially as a parent of younger kids, like some of these influencers, it feels like their problem in their photos is like one kid's wearing ecru and one kid's wearing oatmeal, and it's just terrible. And I'm like, my kid didn't wear pants still. I mean, they're 6 and 7 and they're still naked half the time. Like, I don't want to publicize that. And it can be hard to share those real moments without it feeling like you're just opening yourself up. But also, this is the reality of the thing, like my kid has pants on, I'm calling it a win, or even just underwear, you know. Low bar.
A funny moment like that for us, that retreat that we used to do every year in the mountains at this hot spring. One year, I think our son was maybe 2 or 3. We somehow managed to get him in the car on the 2.5 hour drive to this hot spring and out of the car before we realized he didn't have any shoes.
I've gone places and realized I didn't have any shoes, so I feel pretty good about that.
It was
Yes.
like we were in the mountains in snow, and our son, who could walk, had no shoes. So that was an interesting 3 days of. I don't even remember what we did. I guess we carried him around when we were outside, but I mean, and every family has this stuff. It's just whether or not they share it. And like you're saying, Katie, I don't. Nobody owes us anything. If somebody's social media account exists to share the pretty stuff, they don't actually owe us the hard stuff. So I'm not judging that. I'm just saying that I wanted an alternative voice out there for people.
I feel like they just have to share with the rest of us how they have enough self restraint to only, like, there are pretty moments on our farm and in my family, but it is simply not in my nature to limit myself to, the occasional. And I mean, I am glad that there are people out there with this ability to make these beautiful scenes that they share, because I assume that the rest of their life is a shit show and that, like, maybe it's not. And good for them. Like,
And some people, it's just not. For whatever reason, resources, maybe family nearby, just different energy levels. I mean, no judgment. It's just for the people that's feeling defeating. Come read my book. Or come read my book anyway. It's not like it's only for that. It's that was just one of the things I was thinking about as I was working on the project, is how can we provide a different entry point for people to learn about what it's like. I mean, like, I'm sure your podcast is that for people too. If you're at home struggling with this balance, and you have this life that on one hand is really beautiful and fulfilling, but on the other hand is leaving you feeling like you're never caught up, just to have another place to go for a little commiseration, a little inspiration, a little pep talk.
I like too that you acknowledge the fact, and we talk about this a lot too, that there's no one right way. I mean, this book is going to give you lots of ideas and things that other people have done, but there isn't one way. Like we've said, Katie and I talk all the time about the fact that there's no one way to farm. There's no one doing it right, and that all the rest of us are doing it wrong. Like farms are different for millions of different kinds of reasons, and so is parenting. We all have different kids and we all have different lives, and there's no one way to do this, but the right way to do it is to support each other and to help when we can, in a way that's helpful to the other person, right? I talk about with that with my kids all the time. It's only helpful if the other person wants your help. So if we have things that we can share with people and they want our support or our advice, then we can share it. And if they're not ready to hear it or uninterested, then that's also okay. So yeah, opening ourselves up to that.
I'm sorry, a bit of an aside because this just killed me yesterday. My daughter, we were talking about how she can be a good friend and model being a good friend to one of her little friends. And she said, and then I can help her learn how she can see better so she won't need her glasses anymore. And I was just like, I don't think that's how this works, baby.
I appreciate
Your enthusiasm, but yes, maybe make sure your help is helpful. Yeah.
I can do it. It's easy for me. So why isn't it easy for you? Like I was, that is this is what we said earlier, right? About things always look easier from a distance. That's true for us with time in our own lives, and it's true with us and other people's situations. Yeah.
I think the difference is whether you're
that would be easier for me.
Yeah. When you're 7, that's still acceptable. If you're a grown up, maybe you need to read Katie's book. So
7 is an appropriate age to not yet understand about the differences that define our lives.
All right. So what were some of the common themes when you're talking to that many different kinds of farmers and that many different kinds of families?
Yeah. So, like I said, I really wanted to talk to a lot of different people. And so there were obviously some differences, but a few big similarities that came through in almost every conversation. One was that having a baby's hard. I talked to like a couple people who had really good sleeping kids or something, and they were like, "This is great," but for the most part, people were like, "This was incredibly difficult in ways that I never anticipated, even though I thought I knew what I was getting into." The other theme was that the work gets a lot easier as kids get older, and both need less active help from parents to like do daily stuff, but also can eventually even chip in on the farm in significant ways. And then overall, just people expressed so much gratitude for the experience and the ways that they were able to be with their kids in manners that just wouldn't be possible in a different life path. You know, even if they're busy with the farm, they're having 3 meals a day with their kids, for example, or their kids know intimately about their work and know what they do for a living in a way that a child whose parents go off to work every day would only know in a more conceptual way. And there's just a lot of really great positives about the experience. People love that their kids can do real work. They can play outside, they can eat good food. Those were consistently shared views. But as far as the differences, one of the pronounced ones that I observed in the different interviews was that the level of support a family had around them when they had the baby made a huge difference in how stressful it was. And so that would be, in some cases, people had extended family who were around to support, maybe a grandma. In some cases, they just lived in a different place where there was more parental leave support or childcare support or healthcare support. So, for example, one of the families I talked to in Canada, in Quebec, they are part of a cooperatively owned farm. So everybody is a farmer, but also an employee. So they were all able to take advantage of some really wonderful parental leave benefits that Quebec offers people. And actually, everyone who owns this farm has become a parent. And so they kind of have traded off, you know, who's out of the farm each year, and they've really gotten accustomed to being flexible as a farm, just knowing that people have lives. Totally different experience than the experiences in some cases that I heard of a more typical family owned farm where there was nothing built into their life to help them step away from their livelihood. And so they were either having to take a big income cut or just really trying to scramble. So those were some of the big differences, really, was just what kind of support people had based on their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we talked to a guest a while ago from France, and she talked about a program where they actually have a kind of a relief, like basically a supply farmer system where you have a baby or have an injury and someone can actually come who knows about farming and help you out. Like what an amazing program that would be for people who don't have the opportunity to just, fill in where they were working.
I feel like, too, one of the things that I would really like to see people, including ourselves, talking about more is the fact that people assume you need help with the baby when it's a newborn, like that first 2 or 3 weeks, which, like, for a lot of folks, a newborn sleeps a lot. Like, that was, other than my physical recovery and just the chaos of having a small screaming person in my house, that was not the time that I needed the most support. But especially as a farmer, as kids get older and they get sick, or God forbid they get injured, and they get mobile, yes, and they outgrow everything every 30 seconds, and they have to go to the doctor, and they don't want to go to farmers market, and they have sports ball and whatever else, that those are the times that I've felt that I needed support. I mean, it's not I don't think newborns are that cute. That is my hot take on this show. Just going to go ahead and say it. Most of them are pretty goofy looking. They sleep a lot. They don't go anywhere. Like I'd much rather visit when your kid's cute and can do stuff. Sorry. Not that sorry.
But yeah, the expectation of support, the casseroles end after, about a month or so, and the offers of I'll just hold the baby while you do whatever. But yeah, when you have a toddler having a tantrum in the middle of a field and you just need to get some work done, there's less people lining up to give you a hand then.
I will say I ran into a friend in our local Walmart when my kids were probably 2 and 3, and she tracked us through the Walmart because she could hear my kids from the other side of the store and knew it was my kids through some. She's one of those people. She's just got like psychic mom powers. And she took my kids in a separate cart while I finished shopping. And that was like one of the kindest gifts that I have been given as a parent. Because when you have one crying newborn, people are like, oh, what a sweet little baby. When you have two toddlers, like throwing shit out of the cart and screaming, people are less forgiving. Um, so, more help for people whose kids can cause bigger problems. How's that?
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard Language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage. So, Katie, you shared a story in the book about life getting out of balance after the birth of your second child, and you already alluded to the fact that you had scaled up at a certain point and then scaled back. Do you mind talking a little bit about that time and what that was like for you and for your family?
Yeah, so our second child was born in September of 2012, which we thought it would take us longer to get pregnant. I would never have planned to have a baby in September, but there you go. It happened. And that was a time when we had just bought the property next door to ours and expanded our acreage and started renting the land beyond that. So we were managing 100 acres. We were launching this full diet CSA that I mentioned earlier, where we had this smaller group of families. At that point, our CSA was, I think, close to 200 families. And a group of them switched over to this other program where they were going to pay more money per month, but get a lot of food. And so we were ramping up, hiring more people, had a baby. And then a month after our daughter was born, my husband was diagnosed with a really fast growing melanoma on his neck and needed a pretty urgent surgery because of the way it had been removed. Didn't include enough margin. And so he had to have a neck surgery in Portland, and they took out some of his lymph nodes. And we had a newborn and a almost 3-year-old and all these employees. It was wild. Even before he had the diagnosis, I found myself maybe 3 days after the birth of our daughter doing payroll at the table, sitting on one of those inflatable donuts. And in retrospect, I feel like if you're still sitting on an inflatable donut, it's too soon to be doing any work, even if it's just office work. But also the birth had been a pretty hard one. It was a home birth with a hospital transfer. I had a retained placenta, and I had to go in an ambulance, and I was super anemic after that because of the hemorrhaging for a couple months. So I was just wasted, and it was just like I would wake up every morning because either the baby woke up early or the toddler woke up early. My husband was out like milking cows at like 6 a.m, and I was in the house alone with these 2 very needy children. And it was a hard adjustment for my older child to having the younger one around. So I couldn't really put them down together even because he was kind of like cranky and a little aggressive. And I didn't even feel like I could make myself breakfast. So I would just kind of sit there with these 2 awake kids and sort of cry.
Yeah, that's a whole lot going on at the same time. Yeah.
It was rough. Yeah, it was a rough time. And in retrospect, we sort of wonder why with the baby and the melanoma, we didn't just sort of pull back on all of the plans we put in place for the expansion. But it felt like that wasn't an option. So we followed through. It took us, I don't know how long for all that to sort of feel like it stabilized, kind of maybe a year after my daughter was also colicky, so I had to spend an hour walking around the house holding a baby in a football hold, patting her butt every day. It was just exhausting. um but I also feel, I mean, I don't know, maybe those kind of experiences aren't necessary when having a kid and a farm, but I do feel like to some extent, hopefully not with the whole timing it with an expansion and all that. Like, I don't know if you really know what your limits are until you get to them sometimes in life. And so that was our moment where we really learned our limits, and it was a useful lesson. And we got through it with the support of, like, my parents live next door and they were able to help a little bit. Our kids were in places where they couldn't help a lot, but they did help and they were present for us. And our community was amazing, but it was hard. It was a hard time.
Yeah, and I feel like in farming, I mean, you talked about, making changes, but there's a certain amount of momentum, right? if
Right. Like we
if
had invested money in this, you know?
yeah, if plants are in the ground, if people have bought in, if there's livestock already there, like you've got employees, it's not an easy thing to just be like, we're going to take a break for a month and just put everything on pause. I mean, you can't, that's not an option, and it doesn't really work out that way. Do you do you think from your conversations or from your own experience there are particular ways that farm families can try to reduce that stress load or attempt to find some kind of balance when it feels like things have gotten to that place where it's not working anymore?
Yeah, I mean, my first piece of advice to anybody who's expecting a child, whether it's their first or a subsequent one, if they're also operating a farm, is what are you going to do to balance the new load? Are you going to hire another employee? Are you going to cut out a market? Like, don't expect that you can just add another child and carry the same load you were already carrying. Unless you had lots of free time, and then maybe you can. But that's not usually people's story going into that situation.
Yeah, if you were only working at 80% capacity before, then okay, well, yeah, you've got,
Yeah, or even like
yeah.
50%, if you were just drinking Mai Tais all afternoon, maybe you don't need to change anything, but that's not usually people's story. So, what does that look like? Have a plan of, I almost think of it in my head as like building block pieces. So, you know, if you're adding one, you have to sort of take another away or add something else to support it. That could be hiring childcare, hiring an employee, or it could be cutting back on something. And those are hard decisions because any way you look at it, it's going to cost your family money. Like that's that's the reality of having kids, is especially if you own your own business, is it costs money. And not just like for the diapers and the whatever, the crib or whatever you need. It's it's your time is real work. That's one of the things I really emphasize in this book. Parenting is real work. It's not a job in the sense that you're working for somebody else and you get paid, but it is literally work that if you don't do it, you have to pay someone to do it. And so if you acknowledge that on your part, whether you're the mom filling that role or whether you're co-parenting, which is something that some of the farmers in the book do, where they would do what I call tag team parenting in farming. So like one parent would be out on the fields in the morning and the other one with the kids, and then they would switch off at lunch. Whatever way you're doing it, there's always an adult doing the work of caring for the kids in those early years, and you have to plan for that. There's no getting around it.
I think, too, one of the things we don't talk about enough is the frustration as a parent of having to deal with your children when you have other things that you need to do that you might prefer to be doing in that moment. And especially, if you're farming livestock or something where it has to be done and people are saying, well, just you'll just have to give something up. And I'm like, I can't just not feed the cows. Like that will not work. I can't just not feed my children. And it can be so frustrating to feel like society especially is like, well, you're choosing your work, you're prioritizing your work over your kids. I'm like, well, A, this is how I feed my children, and B, these are living things. I'm not, doing filing that I could put off until tomorrow. It has to be done now. And I think that we lose sight of the fact that as farmers, we have invested so much work and so much money in this that we wouldn't have been doing this if it was something that would be so easy to walk away from, because you wouldn't get up and milk cows twice a day at 4:30 in the morning if it was something that would be perfectly easy to just be like, meh, don't feel like it, not going to do it anymore. If you were that kind of person, you wouldn't be this kind of person. So
Yeah, I there was every year of parenting and farming has been different for us, and there was a period where, so when the kids were little, I would have a um a nanny come a couple days a week so that I could do both paperwork in the house and then also get back into the fields. Not because my work was so magically helpful. It was mostly because it was really important for me to be involved in the farm in that way still, because I was managing people, and I just, for me personally, like, I didn't want to be a part of a farm if I couldn't do the stuff I loved on the farm. But then there was this period where it really didn't make sense to pay somebody to come because the kids could play independently ish. And so there was this period where I was working in the fields sort of with the expectation that they would entertain themselves. And we didn't try to do it for long blocks because we knew that would be disastrous. So we would schedule several smaller blocks through the week where that was happening. And they would often come out because they enjoyed playing out in the vegetable areas. And I have in the book a picture of this little mobile playhouse we built. So they would have a little station where they could keep snacks and have shade in the sun and stuff. But
I was gonna ask you to talk about that because I thought that was such a great idea. Yeah, so like a little MOBA. So as you move, the little playhouse could move, and then they had a home base for.
yeah, we could just pull it around with our little gator that we used to harvest, and it worked okay. I mean, I think it was good to have it there just for the security blanket of knowing they could get in and out of the rain and sun, but mostly they just played more near us. But inevitably, you guys, we would get out there and I would be getting in the harvest or whatever we were working on, and one of my kids would come up and be like, "I have to go poop." And it was and they were a little too young to feel comfortable taking themselves all the way up to the house, which wasn't that far by today's standards, but by their standards, and like going poop by themselves, and they weren't necessarily even totally capable of wiping themselves all the way yet. And so I would have just gotten into the groove, and then it was like, okay, here we go, let's go, let's go.
Yeah, need a potty on wheels too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was, I always had to have flexibility, if there wasn't somebody else who was actively on kid duty, I had to be, or my husband, whoever, which of us was on kid duty, just always had to be, know that there might be an interruption and a need, because that's what it means to be doing the work of taking care of kids.
we're still kind of in that stage because my kids they're 6 and 7, so they do a pretty good job. But yeah, the whole like I can't go to the bathroom by myself. It's too scary. And I'm like, it's the bathroom. Like,
Oh, but to a little kid, it's huge and cavernous and
yeah.
far away.
And I am not a person who is super flexible with interruptions and that. And yeah.
Now that my kids are basically adult-sized people, I just think back to, seeing their little feet dangling off the toilet and the little stories they would tell me, and it's all very sweet in retrospect. But and I laugh at the idea of them wanting me in the bathroom with them, because now it's like, no, I can't even imagine that. They would be like, oh my God.
Or when they wanna be with us, they can't possibly understand why we would want to close the door between us and them.
I know. Now that they're 11 and 14, both of those ideas are, like, so abhorrent to them.
That never happened, Mom.
No. I was like, "You used to tell me stories about dinosaurs while you were pooping." Like, no, no.
It's usually I have mostly trained them not to actually come in the bathroom, but they will stand outside the door and go, "What are you doing? What do you think I'm doing?" Or my daughter will walk in while I'm showering and go, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "You've got the curtain open. You are looking at me. What do you think I'm doing?" Like, mysterious adult stuff, kid. Like, what do you mean? What am I doing? Anyway, so you have a section in the book about homeschooling, and you're a homeschooling family. How has that worked for your family life? And how is that working with you getting a teaching certificate?
Oh, that's a whole different, yeah, I'll get to that at the end, but in terms of the early years of homeschooling, again, I'm a big believer in you can't do everything at once, so for us, deciding to homeschool, again, continued the idea that, in this case, me, because I'm the one who took the lead on it, would have to dedicate some of my energy time to that. And so that meant finding solutions for what that looked like in the farm and around the house, in terms of I wasn't going to be able to homeschool actively and be in the fields harvesting, especially with young kids. Homeschooling kids, it's not like, here's your workbook, kid, I'll see you in an hour. That's not going to work for a 6-year-old. So it was a lot about just carving out the time. And but the cool part about homeschooling, in the way that it works for a lot of people, and this was true for us, is that it does not take a full school day to get the equivalent learning done at home that you would get in a whole school day. Because in the school system, it's doubling as childcare, right? It's doubling as socialization and building soft skills for kids, learning how to wait your turn. There's a lot that happens in a school setting that's really important for kids, but that if you're homeschooling, you can build those things into just your whole day. But as far as the learning to read and do arithmetic and learn how to write with a pencil, that stuff for small kids can fit into a couple hours. So we just carved out that time out of our schedule. We mostly did it in a traditional school year, so that meant in the summer I was a lot freer to be on the farm. But yeah, that was our routine. And then we would schedule my work time on the farm sort of in the afternoons or a whole day. And for a long time, we just did school 4 mornings a week, and that was sufficient. My kids made great progress, but part of that is we were very consistent about it, and we were very focused when we were doing it. I didn't want to just be, you know, having us kind of stare around and not know what we were doing. We always had a plan. We did it, and then we were done. We were done. So the kids could go and play, and I could go do, payroll or email chefs or whatever I needed to be doing. We've really enjoyed it. It's certainly not for everybody. In the book, I interview other farmers who have also made that commitment and really enjoyed it. But there were plenty of farmers I interviewed for whom the local public schools were a great option, and it gave them work time. So I think at the end of the day, a family just needs to decide if it's an experience that they really value and want to have. But then you have to make the time and space for it. Again, this is like, this is like the big message is like, you just you have to make that time and space for a lot of this stuff. You're not going to just be able to pack it all in.
Yeah, that's right. So what does that look like now that your kids are older? How does school look for them today?
Yeah, so the cool part for my kids, and so much is going to be temperament, whether somebody's, got some neurodiversity stuff or learning disabilities they're dealing with. Now that I'm taking ed classes, I'm realizing like kids come to school with so many different temperaments, readiness levels, right? So for my kids, those early years where we put in those hours where I was literally sitting with them doing their work, helped train them to be pretty independent learners at this point. And so the last couple of years, it's been less of me sitting with them and more of me making them lists and planning their weeks for them and then checking in with them. Like we might do an hour where we're checking in or reading something together, but we're not spending the whole morning together. Whereas they are doing at this point more like a full school day worth of school. And that's because they break it up. You know, at home, they're like, well, I'll do my math and then I'll practice my piano and then I'll go ride my bike and then I'll do read something for English class, right? They've become pretty great at managing their time. So I think that's I wasn't really sure what homeschooling would do for us, but I really love the way it's helped my children learn at a pretty young age how to manage their time and be independently motivated. But not every kid gets there at this age. So I don't want to present that. And that's a developmental thing, right? That's not like a one kid is like better than the other kind of thing. Like just kids are on different tracks with that. So that's worked well for us. And it's allowed me to do this thing where I'm branching out now and getting a teaching license. Um, if they were not meeting those milestones, either would probably send them to school at this point, or I wouldn't have be pursuing more work off the farm. So I just really want to send the message that like, I think there's so much where we have, and this applies on to the farm stuff too. And I talk about this in the chapter about farm work. I think people can have idealistic or unrealistic expectations of what kids are capable of and neglect to take into account the actual development of the child, which is about their brain growing and their bodies growing. And kids track on that so differently. And I think that we set them up for more success when we are very honest and clear in assessing what they're capable of doing and then just give them something that's right at their growth point, you know? Um, and that just takes paying attention to your kids and being okay with wherever they're at. And it's going to vary so much within a family. So I have this whole chapter about chores on the farm, and I have a list of like potential chores that you might assign at different ages. I put a note in there like really pay attention to your kids, because in one family you might have a kid who is so ready to take care of the chickens and collect the eggs when they're 6, and then another kid who's just like will not remember, just flat out at 6 is not gonna remember on their own to take care of the chickens, and that's okay.
Yeah, just an example of that in my own family. I have a 16-year-old and he has some vestibular challenges, and driving is challenging for him. And it's something that we're working on because we feel it's an important skill for life. But he does the push mowing. And his younger brother, who's 13, is a pro at the riding mower. But it's just a difference that they have between the two of them. And the 13-year-old, my husband has been doing a bit of tractor work with him in the driver's seat, and he said it's just intuitive for him, and he actually can operate, under supervision, equipment fairly well, where our 16-year-olds, like we're going to push hard to make sure that he knows how to drive a vehicle, but farm equipment is probably not going to be in one of the things that we're gonna push very hard for, because it's definitely more challenging for him, and there are other things that he can do well. So we don't need to give him responsibilities that are going to set him up for failure, right? So you have to follow your kids' interests and also their skills, so that it's things that work for them. And I mean, we do the same things. I mean, there are probably
I was going to say the same here. My husband and I have different jobs on the farm because we have different talents and skills, and
yeah, so we shouldn't look at our kids and be like, all right, everyone should have the same set of chores. Like they can do the things that work for them, for sure.
that doesn't mean to don't ask your kids to stretch themselves, but do it at an appropriate place.
Katie, that actually leads really well into my next question, which is, as my kids are getting to an age where they can actually be helpful with stuff rather than, I mean, they've always been fairly active in farm work, but it's been tagging along, not helping. How do we assess where that, like, what meets their need for a little bit of a stretch and a challenge versus something that is just going to frustrate the hell out of everyone involved. Like what's I don't I don't want things to be too easy for them because it is good for people to be challenged, but also I want to set people up for success, myself and my husband included.
Yeah, I
And
so just speaking from our experience, I think it's a lot just trial and error. And one thing I will say that in our experience with our two kids, so it's only two kids, but this feels pretty kid-like to me, is that over the years they've had interest in taking on responsibilities or doing new things, and we've offered those opportunities, and they've been really excited about them for a period of time and then lose interest. And I think that's pretty typical. I mean, they're wired to be for novelty at this age, right? They are learning about the world. And so I think in some ways it just makes sense. It's the job of childhood is to get as many experiences as you can. So I think feeling out what they might be interested in doing and thinking of it as a trial or a short-term job, right? So that you're not setting people up for failure of like, well, you said you would take care of the chickens for here and forever. Well, yeah, maybe they really just want to take care of the chickens for a couple weeks, you know? And I know that for both of my kids, that on that level, they were really great helpers for short periods with certain projects, younger than I would have expected. But for like the stick with it and actually have it be your responsibility where you actually think about it and remember it and follow through, that actually took longer than I expected. It's kind of just more recent.
yeah, I'm thinking about with my kids, I wonder if giving them a list of chores to choose from rather than this is your thing forever might not help, because what I want is for them to go out and be involved, not it's not that I really give a shit if they pick up the eggs. It's that they get in the habit of being part of the team.
Yeah, I
I
think giving them a list, options.
As adults, the same thing is good, right? Like I like to have days off. I don't want to have to do I mean, I cook lots of days, but there are days where I want to take a day off and not have to cook supper, right? So you can understand that for children too to be like, well, yeah, like you said, caring for chickens is now your job for the rest of your life. Well, like, yeah, is that a fair expectation for an 8-year old, right? Like just because they thought that collecting eggs was cool one day, we need to swap things out or let them have breaks and then say, hey, you get 2 days off, and then you'll be back on in a couple of days, and then you can do it for a few days or whatever. Um, so obviously, I don't want to give away the contents of your whole book because I think that people should buy it and, like you said, be able to refer to it. But are there a couple of key pieces of advice that you feel like farming parents need to hear that we haven't already touched on?
I think we've already touched on this, but I would just say the my biggest takeaway is to build community and support systems around yourself. Whether that's through family, whether it's your employees. A couple people I talked to who have employees on their farm talked about how at this point part of their hiring process is assessing like who's going to be awesome hanging out around their kids. Not that they expect them to do childcare, but they're around their kids, and so that's part of what they think about. um, yeah, just all the different ways that you can build community is just going to make the whole process feel less stressful, more supported.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to acknowledge the fact that if you're hiring someone to work on your farm and you're a family farm, that being around your children is going to be part of the job. So we shouldn't expect that our employees don't have to deal with our kids, because if they're going to be here, then they're part of this as well. Um, we always ask our guests what their favorite thing is about raising their kids on the farm. And it's funny how it's very similar for many people. But what is your favorite thing about raising kids on the farm?
Yeah, I bet that's going to be things you've already heard. But when my kids were younger, I think it was just seeing their pure joy of just having so much freedom to physically move and run and play and like roll in the dirt and go and just pick as much fruit as they wanted to eat every day in the summer. I mean, it was just such like a freedom to I just keep coming back to move that I feel like is rare for kids these days. And it was probably one of my biggest um, discipline, I don't know what you would call it, techniques is when the kids were in the house and starting to get on my nerves or starting to bicker or act out. I was like, this feels like outside energy. And we would go outside, and we had this giant space. And that always was a huge reset button. And it was such a privilege to have that and to be able to see my kids act in ways that seem to come so naturally to them that I know wouldn't have been acceptable in like a city playground or a backyard. There just wouldn't have been room. So that was such a privilege and such a joy. But now that they're older, they're 11 and 14, I think a lot of my joy, I mean, they still love all that stuff, but it comes from being able to see them. This ties back to our conversation about chores, the way that they've been able to be empowered by being a part of something that's real and having their work be real. Like this summer, my son, who's 14, has been working for us. So we are paying him for his time mowing, and specifically mowing some of those edges around the farm that require a little bit more fine tuning, but that we like literally never had time to do because we were moving so fast. And it's been incredibly useful for us, and it's real. Like it's on his home, it's part of our farm, and it's not something kind of I mean, I'm getting my teaching license, so obviously I think schooling is really important. But a lot of what we ask kids to do in school is arbitrary. Like some of it's very real, and they'll use it later, and some of it's like, well, we need to give you something to do. But this feels like so needed, and yeah, they are so, I mean, they're still kids and they're learning like motor skills and all of that, but I feel like they're so much better with their hands than I was at their age. And they've had experiences working with mechanical things, experiences working with animals. My daughter works with a neighbor. She feeds her horses on the weekend. She has draft horses, and she just like does it. She's 11 and she goes into this pen with these giant horses and has this level of comfort that's beautiful to see. It's very cool. I don't know what it'll do for them in life, but it feels like it's all positive.
So I feel a little bad even asking this now. What's the worst part of parenting these days? I'm not going to say biggest struggle. I'm just going to go with worst. Worst.
Oh, worst. Oh, I mean, I'm going to knock on wood. I actually feel like this is a pretty great moment in our family's life, in terms of just everybody not feeling too stretched thin in the way that we often did when kids were younger. But it's definitely interesting, I'd say, to just try to figure out how to help my kids navigate the next steps towards independence. It's mostly happening pretty organically so far, but I think after so many years of being so physically and emotionally intimate with them, we're now at the stage where we're like letting them go, you know? And that's going to take years, but I'm seeing it already. My son, who's 14, is leaving in a week and a half to go on a 2-week backpacking trip. That's not, nobody from our family is going with him. And, I'm going to miss him. So it's just a different stage. It's like you blink, and instead of not feeling like they're too up in your face all the time, it's like, oh, I guess you're gonna go do your own thing now. I'll miss you. I love you. Bye.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I'll get whatever snippets of information you remember to share with me when you get back. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how was your trip? It was good. No, I'm sure he'll be more expressive, but
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting though to kind of lure the information out of them versus when they're little and they never stop talking. Um So you're an author and a farmer and working on being a teacher, but one of your other skills is you're also an illustrator. But being on a podcast, it's a little bit hard to describe that part of your work. But can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that work and where people can see some of your illustrations?
Yeah, yeah. So I have a double major in English and art, but the art stuff got put on the back burner for so many years. And then again, with putting the farm aside in 2020, my husband already had another job, but I was like, oh, I guess I have to figure out a career now, which was a little terrifying, but good. And so I started writing again, which was wonderful. And then it kind of surprised me. I started drawing, and it was partly useful way to make content for Instagram, because I knew if I was going to write books, I needed to have a platform. That's an expectation of writers. And like I said earlier, I'm not super comfortable trying to curate our family's life as content. That's just me personally. And also at this point, that doesn't even get that much engagement. The algorithms have changed.
And they're not as cute. I mean,
They're not. Sorry, it's true. They're not. They're not.
tweens and teens are adorable, but yeah, it's not little bare feet and
But
yeah.
they also, at that age, really deserve their privacy too. So
That's right. Yeah, and if they don't consent to the picture.
Everybody with teenagers gets puppies. Is that why?
yeah, probably.
So they have something cute to post again?
Yeah. And the puppies can't tell you that they don't want you to post that picture.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, I started drawing vegetables because vegetable farmer, and like those still continue to get my most engagement on social media, because I like to draw these little, what I call vegetable guides, where I'll feature a different vegetable and kind of combine illustrations of it with little handwritten text about how to use it. It's all this knowledge that I accumulated over the 15 years of writing CSA newsletters for our customers and talking to them so many times about, like, how do you cook beets? Well, here, I'll tell you for the 150th time.
yeah, here's the tip sheet on me.
So just kind of all that history of working with vegetables and in my own kitchen too, consolidating that into these pretty cute little shareable guides, and farmers love to share them, and farmers markets love to share them, and I think they're really helpful. And then
They
I
are very cute.
I really enjoy making them. They make me really happy, and I like that other people make them too. And then I actually got a job illustrating a whole book based on those drawings. So last year I had a book come out called Edible. I think it's the subtitle. It's been a while since I've promoted it. 70 sustainable plants that are changing how we eat, I think. It's the authors are Kevin Hobbs and Arthur Caesar Erlach, and it's actually a book out of a publisher in England. And it's about edible plants all over the world that are not the ones you would necessarily already know about. So their goal was to highlight some less commonly known plants, plants that might have special advantages in a changing climate. It was a very, very cool project. I learned so much working on it and grew as an illustrator, and I'm very proud of that project. And it is available anywhere you buy books now. Yeah, it was an amazing project. So at this moment, the illustration has again sort of become a side project because I'm promoting this new book and working on getting my teaching license.
And 4 courses.
Yeah, but it's still something I plan to keep doing, and hopefully I'd love to have a future book also feature more illustrations, or be another book that I combine illustration with text. But there are illustrations that I did in this book, The Farm Raised Kids, all the spot illustrations I drew for the book, which was fun. And I also have a few like shirts and mugs and things that you can buy on my website too. I guess I should say that.
I think it's fun too as a neurodivergent person myself. I feel like I see the form of the plant a lot better in an illustration than in a photograph, because in a photograph there's so much other information that my brain goes, "Oh, it's green," and then it's just done. And I'm like, "Cool, that was super helpful, brain. Thank you for that." So I really like the illustrations. Plus, it feels a lot like, as a person of a certain age with hippie parents of a certain type, I assume you grew up with the Moosewig cookbook.
Yes, I cooked from those in that kitchen I ran. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the broccoli forest.
Yeah, I love those. I would definitely count her as one of my inspirations, Molly Katzen.
It's a cookbook with a whole. Was it actually a recipe for a broccoli forest that was like broccoli trees and then hummus or something? Maybe. Yeah, it was a whole vibe.
I think it was some kind of hot dish and you stuck broccoli in it. I mean, honestly, at this point, I probably wouldn't really actually cook any of the recipes in those books just because I eat very differently than that now. Um, but oh yeah, such treasures for sure.
I feel like that one and the vintage Joy of Cooking illustrations of how to skin a squirrel were very formative in my youth. So, if anyone wanted to know how I ended up like this, Broccoli Forest and Joy of Cooking.
I would definitely count Molly Katzen in her illustrations because I think she did those herself, right? And she wrote it all out. It's definitely one of my inspirations. Also, Keith Haring. I got to see an exhibit of his work 2 weeks ago, and it was like felt like a big life goal. But all the comic arts and just graphic novels in general. So, if you haven't had a chance to get on my Instagram and see my illustrations now, I hope you will, just to like figure out what do vegetables look like if somebody's inspired by Keith Haring and Molly Katzen. Also, yeah, there's just the I always forget her name, Wendy Naughton, who I think illustrated the I always forget the order of it. The salt, fat, acid, heat.
Oh yeah, I know the one you mean. Yep.
Yeah, I haven't even finished reading that book because literally every time I pick it up, I stop to draw.
Have you listened to her podcast, Samin Nosrat's podcast?
Of the authors, everybody keeps recommending it, so I need. And apparently, there's like a Netflix series too. I need to watch or some such. Yeah. Yes, I love food. I love food so much.
This is just going to be our spin-off podcast where it's just going to be me and Katie talking about food things.
Oh my gosh. I have so many ideas of projects that I want to do in life, like books and podcasts. And
you also have a podcast, is that correct? Did we mention that?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think it's come up yet. Yeah, I have on my shirt right now. So before I wrote the book, I was a longtime writer for Growing for Market magazine, which is an excellent magazine. If your listening audience hasn't encountered it yet, you can get free copies on our website. We've been around for over 32 years, started by a farmer. It's for farmers. It's written by farmers. It's all about everything related to direct marketing, mostly vegetable and flower growing, but occasionally, meat people slip in there too. And it's a great resource because it's real people doing the real work and they've carefully thought through. So we started a podcast last year and it's the same deal. We interview people who are either themselves direct farmers or who are working directly with them in some support capacity about the issues that we face. So it's everything from like weeding strategies to marketing strategies to business management stuff. So it's definitely picturing that somebody has a commercial oriented farm, but it's all scales, definitely leaning towards the smaller scale farmers. And it's just it was one of my favorite resources when we were starting our farm. The farmer we worked for handed us his binders full of archived magazines and let us borrow them for a few months when we were starting our farm. And then we subscribed for years and years. And then eventually I started writing for them. And then last year, the editor asked me to be a co-host on the podcast. So I get to do what you guys do, interview interesting people about their farms. I'm doing an interview later today, in fact.
That's one of my favorite rural traditions is when somebody hands you a stack of back issues of magazines. It's such a thing.
Yeah. And of course, in 2006, I mean, the internet was a thing for sure, but it was less of a thing as far as now you can take courses on how to start a farm, and there's so much content out there that just wasn't readily available about our work in 2006. So that was really important. And I still think that the magazine has a place because of how digested it is and how many different viewpoints. I love that. This is a thing for me. Lots of stories. Because it is so many different writers. I'm not going to discount the value of an online course, but you're often getting like one farmer's perspective. And for a fraction of the price, you can subscribe to our magazine and every month hear from multiple farmers talking about different aspects of their farm. So it's not like you have to do one or the other, but I really think this is a valuable way to keep getting new ideas and inspiration for the work.
All right, so we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? Categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
Yeah, I I'm not really sure. I don't feel like I'm really amazingly blue ribbon winning at anything these days around the farm, but I am really enjoying making flower arrangements for our house. We used to make bouquets and sell them at market years and years and years ago, but I've never really considered myself a flower farmer or a florist by any means. I don't even really know what I'm doing, but it's special because it's something I just do for our family and for my enjoyment. I make a couple every week and I don't even post about them on the internet. It is literally just a little private, lovely practice to make our house feel brighter. And I feel like this year I got a lot better at it for some reason. I don't know what happened.
You figured at the right balance. Flower arranging is one of those things where you just look at it and you know, right? It's like, that's wrong. Or then all of a sudden, oh, yeah, that looks right.
I think I realized I need to be adding more flowers. There are just like a lot of flowers this year.
I feel like your illustrations could win some prizes too. So I'm going to throw that in there. It's another entry. Yeah.
I did once win a Judge's Choice Award or some such for the stockings I knitted for my family for our Christmas. I made one for each of us, and they were all different. We used to enter stuff in the fair every year and never got back in the habit after the pandemic, which is such a story of so many things, I think.
So I will go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing. We'll keep it kind of short this week, but if you're a listener and want to submit anything, you can use our SpeakPipe or our email, and the links are both in the show notes. Katie, what do you have to cuss or discuss this week?
I'm going to go ahead and say I really struggle with when I hear things that, as a farmer and as who I am and the life experience I have, I hear something that is so effing ridiculous and hilarious, but I know that to other people it might actually be scary or strange or what have you. And trying to oh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Um trying to empathize and not laugh too hard in their faces. Um so we have a house painting crew here. Lovely young women, busting their asses, doing an amazing job. We have free range chickens. We have Rhode Island Reds. They're not real bright, but they are real friendly. And we just got some more that came from another farm. And one of them must have been a pet. Somehow, despite them having like 7,000 birds in their flock, this one is just like attuned to humans. And she's been following me around the yard. I didn't really think anything of it. She'll come and she'll stand on my feet and she'll just kind of look at me for a while and then she wanders away. Like this is just her thing. Whatever, it's weird. Yesterday, I get a text from the owner of the painting company asking if I can keep the chickens inside. Not the dogs, mind you, not the two large, noisy, toothy dogs. The chickens, not the roosters, the hens, because they're chasing his painting crew and they're afraid of them. Which I can see if you're not a chicken person, chickens are fucking weird animals. And I'm sure that having one that's like chasing you around and trying to stand on your feet and staring at you is probably disconcerting. But the mental image of these women who are like working in loader buckets doing this hard manual labor being afraid of a 3-pound hen. So then my daughter says, I'll go out and tell the chickens to leave them alone. And I go out, and my daughter is out there clucking at them because, of course, you have to speak chicken language. And this is just things that don't happen to normal people in normal families with normal lives. No worries, my kid's just out here speaking chicken language, and of course, the painting crew is standing here watching my kid because I had already let the chickens out. And I, and then my daughter goes, maybe we can cook the painters some eggs tomorrow so they'll feel better. I'm just, the whole experience. I don't know. It was just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
Well, it's time for my annual rant about living in the Willamette Valley where we live. People maybe who don't live in the region don't know this, but we don't get rain really in the summer. The whole West Coast, although we did this week a little bit. But this is the time of year when it really catches up, and farmers are like doing a lot of work in their fields, and it's very dusty. And then we get wildfires and it gets smoky, although that hasn't happened yet. And we're just in the time of year where um, it gets the air quality gets pretty rough, and I don't love it. it's pro Yeah, it's hard for everyone. So yeah, we're hitting that. Lots of dust. So far, no smoke. I'm gonna knock on wood. It'll happen. But
Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss?
So we're recording in the summer, although this won't come out until September. But this past weekend, we were helping my daughter move some things into the house that she'll be living in September in her university town. And I want to cuss moving things because it is, I mean, there are people who have skills in moving, and I am so glad that they have those skills, but I am not one of them. And we had this couch. It was in our house, and it was a good excuse to get rid of it. You know, we had had it for a while. It still looks decent. It'll be perfect for a student house, but was always just like that little bit too low. And as someone in my 40s, it was getting to the point where if I was wanting to get out of it, I started to make like a groaning noise as I stood up. So I was like, all right, we'll bite the bullet, invest in a new couch, and she and her roommates can have this one. So the front door had a closet, and then it's a townhouse, so it wasn't going to fit in the front door. So then we got it around to the back of the house through someone else's yard because it's in like this little subdivision. And then the patio door wasn't big enough, and it was just like, are we going to have to cut this thing apart, or like how are we ever going to get this couch into the house? Anyway, through lots of angles and a lot of sweating and maybe a bit of swearing, we did finally get it in. But when they're done with it, they're just going to have to sell it to the people who move in next because it's not coming back out of that door. I don't even really know how it had all worked out, but I hate moving. It's not fun. But we did the traditional farmer move where we use the cattle trailer because you don't want to rent a U-Haul if you don't have to. So, you clean it out pretty good, throw down some tarps, and then just put the furniture in there. So we may have picked a few pieces of hay off of stuff, but it didn't rain, thankfully, on the drive because it's not watertight, but we got the stuff there and it got delivered. So it was all good.
And it's good. It'll smell more like home.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, hopefully her roommates appreciate that. They're not Aggies.
yeah, we've moved many a friends with our box truck over the years.
Yes. Use what you
yeah,
have, right?
yeah. Like, hey, Katie and Casey, you guys have a box truck.
Is it full of vegetables or can we put some stuff in there? So we want to thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. You talked a little bit about do you want to mention where people can find you online? And then I also was thinking about the fact at the end of each of your chapters, you have some discussion and journaling questions for people to think about. So I wondered if you might have a question that we could ask people to consider or to spend some time thinking about as we sign off today.
Yeah, definitely. So, yes, people can find me, like we mentioned, on Instagram, and it's just my name, Katie Kulla, as one word. KATIEKULLA is my handle over there. And I have a website, same thing, katiekulla.com, where you can find out all the latest info about what I'm working on and get links to buying those kind of merch I have. The book, which is Farm Raised Kids, is available for pre-order now if you're interested in buying it, which I hope you are after listening to this. And you can pre-order anywhere that sells books. So I would definitely recommend checking out your local bookstore, supporting them. They should be able to order it. Or if you go onto my website, there's a link to bookshop.org, an affiliate link that if you want to buy it there, it supports independent bookstores and I get a little small kickback. Yeah, I think those are the main ways.
And what's the release date on it? I don't think we actually said that.
Oh yeah, it's October 29th. So it'll be just a little over a month after this podcast releases, it sounds like. Just in time for sitting by the fire in the winter and thinking. And yes, so every chapter, I didn't really go through the content of the book so much, but there's the first half of the book is about the farm family lifestyle. The second half is more about the different ages and stages in the farm family, so like baby versus teenager. But each of the chapters ends with a series of questions. And my goal with those was that maybe people could read this book in a group, maybe with their spouse or partner or other parent friends, or if you just want to read it on your own, even journal. I really think that the most useful conclusions and information from this book are going to be the ones that somebody comes up for their own situation after reading this. But I know, especially now that I'm training to be a teacher, that actually using some intention to write or talk about something dramatically increases your engagement with the ideas. So I do encourage people to use it as a tool in that way, especially if they're at a place in life where they could use some problem solving. So I'll leave you all with one question from the chapter about finding balance and addressing stress. So this is a question that I ask people to consider after that chapter. What are your current ideas about what it means to be a farm family? And are those ideas helpful or harmful to you? So hopefully people can wrestle with balancing their dreams or preconceptions or stereotypes with what's really important for them as a family. That was my goal with that question.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm going to give some thought to that myself today. So thank you so much for joining us. It was great to meet you and to have these conversations. I love that we're doing a lot of the same things.
Yes, it was so good to meet you and Arlene and Katie, and I'm so stoked that you have this podcast, and there's many ways for people to access these ideas. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.